The lights of the city shimmered far below the apartment windows, scattered across the night like tiny fallen stars resting on the streets. From that height, the entire city looked magical, glowing softly as cars moved through the avenues like slow streams of light. I had always loved standing near that tall window and watching the restless energy of the metropolis below. Something about it reminded me how alive the world was, how every passing moment carried new possibilities, new beginnings, and quiet stories unfolding in places I would never see. Yet on this particular evening, when I slipped my key into the lock and quietly stepped inside our apartment, that sense of vibrant life seemed strangely distant. Usually, the building was full of comforting sounds, the faint chatter of neighbors through the walls, the occasional laughter drifting down the hallway, the distant hum of traffic echoing from the street below. Sometimes there would even be music rising from a nearby cafe or a car radio passing by. But tonight, the apartment felt unusually still, almost too still. I had left the office earlier than usual that day. Endless meetings had filled the afternoon, and my mind felt heavy with unfinished tasks, spreadsheets, and unanswered emails. The pressure of work had worn me down more than I expected. All I really wanted was to come home and relax. I imagined walking into the living room and finding my husband comfortably settled on the couch with his favorite novel, or perhaps Julian, my stepson, sitting cross-legged on the floor, completely absorbed in one of his complicated strategy games, his headphones blocking out the rest of the world. Instead, the apartment greeted me with darkness. Only a thin line of warm light escaped from beneath the living room door, stretching across the hallway floor. A faint sense of curiosity, maybe even concern, stirred inside me. I moved quietly down the hallway, almost instinctively softening my footsteps as if I didn't want to disturb the silence. Slowly, I reached for the door and pushed it open just enough to peek inside. The sight that greeted me made me pause. Julian was lying back on the sofa, the soft glow of the television flickering gently across his face. The screen changed colors every few seconds, casting shifting shadows along his features. His eyes were half closed. For a moment, I wondered if he had fallen asleep, but something about the way he held himself suggested otherwise. His posture was too deliberate, too focused. His breathing seemed steady, measured, almost thoughtful. He looked deeply absorbed in whatever he was watching, or perhaps in his own thoughts. It felt like I had stumbled into a moment that wasn't meant to be interrupted. Maybe the program on the television had stirred something emotional in him. Maybe he was reflecting on something important. There was an atmosphere of quiet concentration around him, like someone allowing themselves a rare moment to simply feel. A wave of awkwardness washed over me. Without making a sound, I slowly closed the door again. I didn't want to intrude. Walking down the hallway toward my bedroom, I felt strangely thoughtful. Each step seemed heavier than the last, as I tried to make sense of what I had just witnessed. Once inside my room, I shut the door behind me and leaned against it for a moment. The cool surface steadied my breathing. My bedroom had always been my sanctuary, the one place where I could pause, breathe, and untangle the thoughts swirling in my mind. I crossed the room and gently opened the curtains. Outside, the city glittered exactly as it had before, beautiful, bright, and endlessly alive. Yet it offered no answers to the quiet questions forming in my thoughts. I sat down on the edge of the bed, still wearing my work clothes. Julian had changed so much over the years. He was no longer the awkward, lanky teenager who had first entered my life. University had shaped him in ways that were impossible to ignore. There was a confidence about him now, a quiet sense of direction and maturity that hadn't been there before. Watching him earlier, alone with his thoughts, reminded me just how much he had grown. Part of me felt proud. Another part felt nostalgic for the younger version of him I used to help with homework and cheer for at soccer matches. Eventually, I changed into comfortable clothes and slipped beneath the blankets. I switched off the bedside lamp, allowing the room to fall into darkness. but sleep refused to come easily. My mind kept wandering back to the living room, to the flickering light on his face and the quiet solitude he seemed to carry with him. What had he been thinking about? Was it stress from university classes, worries about the future, or simply one of those rare moments when someone allows themselves to sit still and reflect on life? Eventually, exhaustion overcame curiosity, and I drifted into sleep. Morning arrived with soft golden sunlight streaming through the curtains. As always, I rose early. The familiar rhythm of the morning routine brought a sense of comfort. Coffee began brewing in the kitchen, filling the air with its rich aroma. Bacon sizzled gently in the pan, while slices of toast warmed in the toaster. When Julian finally came downstairs, he looked rested, though there was a hint of hesitation in the way he moved. "Morning," he said, his voice still thick with sleep. "Good morning, sweetheart," I replied warmly. He poured himself a glass of orange juice and leaned casually against the kitchen counter. "Did you sleep well?" He shrugged slightly. "More or less." We sat down for breakfast together. I asked about his classes, and he began describing a difficult economics lecture, a complicated group project that wasn't going smoothly, and a professor who seemed to enjoy asking impossible questions. I listened carefully, nodding and asking questions here and there. But beneath the conversation, a quiet decision had already formed in my mind. After breakfast, as he gathered his books and prepared to leave, I spoke gently. "Julian, before you go, could we talk for a moment?" He paused, backpack halfway over his shoulder. "Sure, what's going on?" I took a slow breath. Last night, I came home earlier than usual that day. When I opened the living room door, I saw you watching television. You seemed really focused, and you didn't notice I was there. I didn't want to interrupt, so I left. His cheeks flushed slightly. "Oh, I didn't realize." "I just wanted to say I'm sorry if I intruded on a private moment. I never want you to feel like you don't have your own space here." He looked down at the floor for a second before speaking. "I was just thinking a lot about school, about what comes after graduation. I guess my mind was pretty full." I smiled reassuringly. "You don't have to explain anything. I only want you to know that if something ever feels heavy or confusing, you can talk to me. And if you'd rather keep it to yourself, that's okay too." He looked up then, meeting my eyes. "Thanks," he said quietly. "That actually means a lot." A small smile passed between us. "I'll see you tonight. I'll make your favorite pasta." The rest of the day moved along in its usual rhythm, work calls, errands, and a short walk through the nearby park, but my thoughts often returned to Julian. That evening, when he returned home, the atmosphere felt lighter. We cooked dinner together, laughing when he accidentally spilled half the grated cheese across the counter. Conversation flowed easily. Later, when we cleaned the kitchen, he said thoughtfully, "I think I really needed that quiet time last night. Just sitting there and letting my mind slow down." I nodded. Sometimes that's exactly what we need. Over the following weeks, something quietly changed between us. Julian began sharing more about his life, small worries at first, then bigger hopes and fears. In return, I shared stories from my own university days, including mistakes and lessons learned. We watched movies, played board games, and occasionally went for evening walks. The apartment no longer felt like two separate lives under one roof. It felt like a real home. Months later, one evening as we sat on the balcony watching the city lights, Julian spoke softly. "You know, I used to think I had to figure everything out alone, but having you here makes things easier." I reached over and squeezed his hand gently. "And I make you feel like the luckiest stepmother in the world," I said. We sat there quietly, side by side, watching the city glow beneath the night sky. And in that peaceful moment, I knew something important. Family isn't just about blood. Sometimes it's about trust, patience, and the willingness to truly listen. And that kind of bond is something worth protecting, always.